Been a long time since we've been together. A really long journey together. A lot longer than I expected. And for that, I am partially responsible. Sometimes I ask too many questions. Sometimes I repeat my questions. Sometimes I pause too long in between questions. And for that, I apologize to you. People say to me, how can you do a case like The People versus Reginald Burks? And I look at them and I tell them, imagine you're on a ship and you're out there on the deck and you see a splash in the water. And you look closely and you see it's a person. And in that moment, you have a choice. To act, to jump on a lifeboat, lower it down into the water, and rescue that person. Or you can choose not to act. You can close your eyes and look away and pretend like you never saw it. And nobody will know except you. In that moment, you ask yourself, I wonder if that's an adult or a child. I wonder if that person will be able to pay me for the time I'll miss from work while I'm trying to save them. Or in that moment, do you just simply act? Because that moment is a lot like the moment that Reginald Burks faced, a moment that he's never faced before. When he was driving down the road, headed west on Byrne, towards Mansfield. And he sees his brother DeJuan backing up from two vans, a white one and a purple one, with his hands up in the air. And as he gets closer to them, he sees that it's his brother. And he stops his car, and he gets out. Reginald Burks is not a coward, like the prosecutors told you. Reginald Burks is a hero. On that day, he saved his brother's life. His brother DeJuan. And also his own life. And then 4 days later, when he gets the phone call from his brother and the Bohannons and talks to them, and for the first time realizes that perhaps somebody was hurt from the shooting that happened out there. And perhaps an innocent man is locked in jail. At that moment, Reginald Burks acts. He doesn't think about himself. He thinks about doing the right thing. And he immediately leaves work, goes home, grabs his gun and the cartridges that go in it, and goes down to the police department. On his way down there, he stops at his friend Lester Jones' home. And at Lester's house is another friend of Lester's named Tracy Tigner. And they head to the Detroit Police Department. On the way there, they stop at his mom's house, because his mom had called him. And he explains to the police officers where he's headed to, that he has a CPL, and identifies himself, and that he has a gun in the car, and briefly explains the situation. And then him and Tracy Tigner and Lester Jones head to the police department so he can speak with Detective Hampton. And when they get there, on the way there, Tracy Tigner says to Reg, hey man, I wouldn't go down there without a lawyer if I was you. Because, why does he say that? Because he knows how the Detroit Police Department is. He knows the kind of investigations they do. And do you remember when Lester Jones told you, Tracy Tigner, how the prosecutor wrote it down real detailed? Tracy Tigner, Detroit police officer. But Reg goes into that police station and finds Detective Hampton. And Detective Hampton takes him back for an interview. But Detective Hampton isn't really taking him back there for an interview. Detective Hampton has already made up his mind. Because before Reg says one word to him, He says, "I'm gonna let you know you're under arrest." And then he goes on to question Reg for 1 hour and asks him what happened. And Reg explains what happened. Thank God that was recorded. Because if it wasn't, just imagine the words that Detective Hampton would have put into Reginald's mouth. But he couldn't, because there was a video of it. And when you act and drop that lifeboat to rescue that person, and you spend some time with them, you might find that the two of you are a lot more alike than you are different. And after some time, you might actually become friends. Let me tell you about my friend, Reginald Burks. You heard the kind of man he was, the man he is. And you've heard what happened that night and what he tells the police that night. And he tells them, pause for 1 second. Oh. My friend Reginald Burks. You know, my dad said to me before, circumstances don't make the man, they reveal him. Because if circumstances made the man in the neighborhood that Reginald grew up in, without a father, in poverty, he would have been in prison long ago. But Reginald rose above his circumstances. And to have a family and to have a home, and not only to take care of his family, but he also takes care of his brothers and sisters. And that's not easy. But he does it. Because the man who he is. And if he wasn't the kind of man he is, Chris Bohannon would have sat trial or be sitting here today and easily convicted by a jury with 3 eyewitnesses. But that's not the kind of man Reginald Burks is. What happens that day is Reg is headed down Mansfield, and he comes upon the scene where the vans are, and there's people standing outside of it. Actually, let me change that too. And when he's interviewed by Detective Hampton, he tells Detective Hampton how he's driving west on Burn to Mansfield, and he sees his brother backing up with his hands up in the air. And he pulls over, and his brother runs to his car, DeJuan. When his brother runs to his car, he says to him, "Reg, these niggas got guns." And Reg is looking, because he can't see a gun at that time. He's like, "Huh? Who?" He's like, "Well, it's that motherfucker right there." And Reg is like, and then he sees the man lift his shirt and draw a gun. And at that time, Reg draws his own gun. And he waits. He doesn't shoot. But when that person at the van shoots, pow! Reg fires back, pow, pow, pow! And he ducks for cover. And when he looks up, the vans are driving away. And DeJuan gets back in the car. He's like, "We gotta get out of here. They might come back." And they turn around and they go back to Lester Jones's house. And Reg is on the phone with 911 and explains to them what happened. And he explains to them how he was shot at. He explains to them how there's a red, a white, and purple van driving around the neighborhood, shooting at people. And they sit and they wait for the police to come. And after about 10 or 15 minutes they do. And first comes a white police car, a regular police car with uniformed officers. And he explains to them what happened and how these people shot at him and he fired back and showed him his gun and his CPL. And they asked him which way they went. He tells them they went that way on Burn, and the police take off. And moments after that, another car pulls up. This time it's a black unmarked car with police officers in regular clothes. And they again ask him what happened, and he tells them briefly what happened. And they say, "Wait here, we'll be back." And so he sits and he waits for 30 to 40 minutes. In the meantime, he calls his boss, let him know he'll be a little bit late to work. But the police never come back. And then 4 days later, he gets that phone call. And we know what happens from there. Now let's talk about the story that the prosecutor wants you to believe. Wants you to believe.
Self-defense. Just to get in quick before you go too far off. Self-defense, putting yourself in his shoes.
Oh,
Then your mom's.
oh, you're right. Migos station, right. One of the jury instructions in this case is self-defense. And that means that you have to put yourself in Reginald's shoes and see through his eyes. And that's a very difficult thing to do unless you've had the same experience. Back on September 19th of last year, my mother passed away. And that was the first person I ever cared about and knew that died. And in the past, when friends had lost somebody, I didn't know what to say to them. Saying to them, I'm sorry for your loss, just didn't feel right because I had no idea what their loss felt like. But unfortunately for me, now I do. And until you've experienced it, you don't know. And Reg had a lot of unique experiences between the 24th and 28th. Having somebody point a gun at them, having to point his gun back at somebody, being shot at, having to shoot back at somebody else, having to shoot back at somebody else, getting a call 4 days later after he talked to the police, left their information with 911, that somebody was hurt. Somebody may be hurt, and somebody is locked up who is innocent. Having to go to the police and talk to them and be interrogated by the police. Because up to this point in his life, he's always trusted the police. But now, you've seen the investigation. You've seen what the police did. Now things are different. Let's go to the story that the prosecutor wants you to believe. They want you to believe that Raquel Wright was just on her way to the store. Well, we know that's not true because Deontay Wright tells you that, in fact, they were driving around looking for people who had beat up his brother. Derek Payne tells you that he got a call from Raquel Wright asking him to come over because somebody had beat up Robert. They was at a funeral with Kevin McClung. And Kevin McClung tells you that, in fact, Raquel called Derek, and that's why they were there. And we also know that because when Raquel drew on the map, she drew the opposite direction of where the store was, at 6 Mile and Ashbury Park. So we know that that was a lie. And then he wants you to believe that they just randomly stopped at the intersection, according to Raquel Wright's story. Just randomly ran into Derek Payne. Well, we know that's not true. And how do we know that? Because, well, Deontay Wright tells you that they were following Derek Payne around the neighborhood. Derek Payne tells you that he was following Raquel Wright around the neighborhood. And Kevin McClung tells you that they were following Raquel Wright around the neighborhood, looking for the boy who had beat up Robert. And then he wants you to believe that none of the people in these two vans have guns. Well, we know that that's not true. And how do we know that? Well, first of all, common sense tells us that this group of people is not going to go face 20 young men who, to their information, are armed with a gun. But how else do we know it? Because Erica Lomax and Monty Stewart and Stephanie Lomax all told you that, in fact, Raquel Wright and Robert Wright had guns that day out there on Mansfield. And these are independent witnesses who, if any bias they would have, would be against the Burks because of the fact that apparently there's some problem with DeJuan. But even though they might have some problem with DeJuan, they still came here and told you the truth of what happened on that day on Mansfield. So that's how we know that, in fact, they have a gun. And then, reason of Reginald fired first. They want you to believe that. And how do we know that that's not true? Well, we know it from Talisha Mills, because she's sitting right there in the front seat. And when asked about the gunshots, she tells you that, in fact, she can see Derek Payne, because he's somewhere within her vision, sitting in that chair. So he must be somewhere near the driver's side door. And amazingly, that's what Deontay Wright tells the police that night. But there's one, at least one, maybe two other people outside the van that she can see, but she's not really sure exactly where they're at. And so that's one reason that we know that people were outside, from the white van, people were outside the van. But then when asked about the gunshots she heard, where did it come from, the first shot, what did she tell you? She didn't know. She didn't know if the people that were with the white and purple van fired first, or in fact, Reginald Burks had. And the reason why she didn't know is because she knew that somebody would.